you are now also a member of editorial board for maybe Teens Journal, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, no, a few different ones. At the moment, I just don't have enough time to do all the reviewing that I'm asked to do. But
yeah. So,
choose.
yeah. Good morning, Yuli.
Sorry. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Rest your voice. Look after yourself.
Mrs. Yuli probably got cold here.
Mm.
Yeah, so her voice will be elapsed. Yeah.
Thank you, David.
No worries. Yeah. Best wishes for rapid recovery.
Yeah.
Okay.
Welcome to the of Science Education, Faculty of Teacher Training and Education, Sebelas Maret University. With the rapid development of technology and global challenges, the need for in-depth research is increasingly needed to solve more complex problems. The doctoral program of science education is here to answer these problems by focusing on the design, improvement, and development of an integrated education system consisting of humans, science, technology, and art.
Doctoral program of science education has vision become a center for the development of excellent science and science learning at the international level in 2024 based on national educational and cultural values. And with mission 1, organize science education and learning oriented to the development of science and technology and the values of national education and culture. 2. Conducting studies of science education and learning through research by lecturers and students. 3. Organizing community services at the field of science education and learning that is beneficial to the community. And 4. Organizing professional cooperation with various parties in the national or international scope.
The doctoral program of science education, Sebelas Maret University, is committed to producing graduate educators who are able to master learning theories, strategies, methods, and techniques, and increasing the effectiveness and efficiency of teaching and learning process. As well as committed to producing graduates of science education researchers and developers who have the ability to innovate and develop science education and learning that is oriented towards the development of science and technology to produce creative, original, and tested works that are beneficial to the science and mankind and are able to get national and international recognition. The doctoral program of science education, Sebelas Maret University, supported by 11 professors and 5 doctors who are qualified and experienced in scientific activities and researches, as well as publications at national and international levels. The doctoral program of science education, Sebelas Maret University, is also supported by adequate facilities for learning and research activities, including teaching staff and administrative staff rooms supported by the control quality to ensure the quality of education, comfortable and representative classrooms equipped with air conditioner, LCD projector, and internet access, meeting room which can be used by students to exchange ideas, discuss, and work together. Laboratories equipped with the latest technology which can support student learning and research activities include chemistry laboratory, biology laboratory, and physics laboratory. The doctoral program of science education routine conducting scientific forum which involved the competent speakers in the scale of national and international. The latest scientific forum is third ICOSAF with foreign speakers, namely Assistant Professor Xiaoming Zai, PhD from University of Georgia, Ross D. Arnold, PhD from Chief Scientist, U.S. Army, Professor Vicente Talanguer from University of Arizona, and Ahmad Yunus, Magister of Art from Sebelas Maret University. To understand the problems on a national and international scale, the doctoral program of science education, Sebelas Maret University, collaborates with domestic and foreign universities, holding activities including guest lectures and expert course, namely Bambang Sumintono, PhD from University Malaya, Malaysia, Professor Dr. Samsul Hadi from Yogyakarta State University, Dr. Maria Paristiawati from Jakarta State University, Imam Kambali, MPhil, PhD from Accelerated Technology Research Center, Yogyakarta, Professor Bob Puchat from University of Western Australia, Professor Dr. Kusayedi from Islamic State University of Sunan Ampel. Visiting professors, namely Scott Bartholomew from Brigham Young University, Professor Lee Eugene from National Institute of Education, Singapore, and Dr. Heri Retnawati from Yogyakarta State University. An international seminar, namely Professor Maria Parapili from Flinders University, Australia, and Professor Sonia Martin from Seoul National University. The doctoral program of science education, Sebelas Maret University, also facilitated workshop and article writing systems for doctor candidates, namely Sri Rahayu PhD from Malang University, Yuli Rahmawati, Magister of Science, PhD from Jakarta State University. Professor Dr. Sudan Kun Prasetyo from Yogyakarta State University. After being declared to have passed, the doctoral candidate has the right to carry out an open examination for the doctoral promotion ceremony, which is held in the postgraduate hall and is open to the public.
We are ready to be your partner to take part in the development of science and technology for better education.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Sehat Pak Dekan?
Alhamdulillah sehat, Prof. Sulis.
Oke.
Good morning, Prof. David. Thank you very much for joining this activity.
No worries. Thank you. I look forward to it.
Mas Dwiki, probably it is better to start from now, Mas Dwiki.
Yes, Prof. Alright. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dwiki Mahendrasani. It is a wonderful, precious chance for me to be your master of ceremony in this beautiful month at the meeting on Friday, 18 November 2022. In our big event, visiting professor by Professor David Geelan with 10 publication scientific article in Reputable journal. The Honorable Mr. Mardiana Doctor, as Dean of the Faculty of Teacher Training Education, the Honorable Professor Sulistyo Saputra, PhD, as Chair of the Doctoral Program Science Education, Universitas Sebelas Maret, and also Head of Education and Teaching of the Indonesian Chemical Society. Once more, we do thank you for presence, Mr. and Mrs. Lecture. Welcome to all participants in the visiting professor today. On the special month, we have several agendas. Please allow me to read several sequence of our agenda. The first is opening, which we previously had read together. The second is singing Indonesia Raya. The third is remark. The fourth, the core event visiting professor by Professor David. The final is closing. Step on the following agenda is singing Indonesia Raya. Please, good manner. Finish. The next agenda is remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, I immediately invite Chair of the Doctoral Program Science Education Universitas Sebelas Maret and also Head of Education and Teaching Indonesian Chemical Society. For Professor Sulistyo Saputro PhD, please welcome.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dwiki. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much for being here with us today. We are very pleased to welcome you in this visiting professor, head by Doctorate Program of Science Education, Faculty of Teacher Training and Education, Universitas Sebelas Maret, in collaboration with the Indonesian Chemical Society. Today, we are proud to be able to host it here by Zoom meeting, but I hope that this online lecture will give you a significant impact due to the social distancing norm during COVID-19 pandemic. As we all know, with the writing an international article is one of the graduation requirements for master's and doctoral program students. So our discussion this time will be very useful for us. Before we get started, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to all of you who generously help us make this event come together to become a success. First, Professor David Geelan from School of Education, University of Notre, Australia. Good morning, Prof. David. Selamat pagi.
Salamat, I'm so sorry. I just knocked things off my desk and didn't unmute. Hi, Professor and everybody.
Yeah, thank you. And the second one, I would like to express my gratitude to our Dean, Dr. Mardiana. Selamat pagi, Pak Dekan.
Selamat pagi, Prof. Sulis. Good morning.
Okay, good morning. And then our colleagues from the Indonesian Chemical Society, Bu Yuli Rahmawati, and all of our friends, also our colleagues in Association of the Indonesian Postgraduate in Science Education, and all of our colleagues from Universitas Sebelas Maret or UNS and some universities in Indonesia. In today's visiting professor, with theme of publication of scientific articles in reputable journal, will be given by Professor David Geelan from University of Notre, Australia. He was belong to be editor-in-chief of Research in Science Education Journal from 2016 until 2018, and now he is also an editorial board of Journal and Research in Science Teaching. That is, will be the top-ranked journal in the field of science education. And then Education Sciences, Research in Science Education, and some reputable journals. Hopefully that this lecture will be value-adding to all and contribute to existing knowledge and pragmatic in especially in writing and international articles. Thank you very much, and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Prof. Solis, for the remark. For the next remark, I immediately invite the Dean of the Faculty of Teacher Training and Education, Dr. Mardiana give his remark and continue for the opening of the visiting professor today. Please welcome Dr. Mardiana.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Dwiki Mahendrasani. The Honorable Professor David Geelan from School of Education, Universitas Notre, Australia. The Honorable Professor Sulistyo Saputra, Head of Doctorate Program of Science Education, Faculty of Teacher Training and Education, Universitas Sebelas Maret. Dear participants, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning. On behalf of the Faculty of Teacher Training and Education, Sebelas Maret Universitas, first of all, I would like to welcome you all to the virtual visiting professor with the theme Publication of Science Article in Reputable Journal. Thank you very much for joining this virtual visiting professor. Secondly, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to the Department of Doctorate Program of Sciences Education, Faculty of Teacher Training and Education, Universitas Sebelas Maret, in collaboration with the Indonesian Chemical Society for hosting and organizing this event. Before giving the time to the distinguished speaker, I will take this opportunity to make some general remarks and touch briefly on the overview of this program. Through this program, we will hear inspiring ideas and innovation from the expert speakers, which help us to understand the basic characteristics of research and publication, so we can publish our scientific article in the international reputable journal. Allow me to take this opportunity to convey my deepest gratitude to speaker, Professor David Geelan, for your availability and willingness to share your knowledge, experience, and expertise. I would like to express my genuine appreciation to all participants who are taking part in this visiting professor. Without you all, the activity would not have been possible. I wish you enjoy this lecture and get some benefit from this lecture. To fulfill the committee's request by saying Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, I declare the virtual visiting professor is officially open. That's all my speech. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Dr. Mardiana, of the Dean of Faculty Teacher Training and Education, for the remarks and for the opening of the inbound school in visiting professor day. Let's keep on the next agenda. Our event, that visiting professor by Professor David Geelan from University of Notre, with theme publication of scientific article in reputable journal, which will be guided by the moderator, Dr. Yuli Rahmawati. Please welcome Dr. Yuli.
Good morning, colleagues. Thank you, Mr. Dwiki. Thank you, Professor Saputra and Dean. Thank you all for the welcome, and thank you all attendees. I see 75 people are in the room, which is fantastic. I very much look forward to talking with you. I do need to thank Dr. Yuli Rahmawati for all the contact with me leading up to this presentation. She's unwell at the moment and struggling to speak a little bit, so we might use the chat quite a lot around the moderation and the questions for the discussion, if that's okay. I will be sharing, I have shared my PowerPoint slides with her, so if you want to have the slides, because there's quite a lot of information on them, they're available, and the session is also being recorded. So I will probably speak quite quickly because I want to tell you a lot of things in a short time, but there will be opportunities to go back to the recording or the PowerPoint. So let me share the screen and start sharing some ideas. Okay, so this, I should have actually said also that Dr. Yuli and I were supervised by the same person, and I saw him in the video at the start, Professor Peter Taylor from Curtin University. I think she was supervised about 15 years later than I was, but we both have the same academic father in Peter Taylor. This is my very first published article from 1995. So 27 years ago, this is a picture of a web description of that article because the World Wide Web had barely started at that time in 1995. So I couldn't find an archive of that journal article. And now we are on Zoom having a shared virtual conversation from some considerable distance away. So things have moved on a little bit in the time that I've been writing and publishing. Now, I share this slide with a bit of caution. This is not to boast about how good I am. It is to explain why I might be someone who has something useful to share on this topic. So I have written quite a lot, including publishing in most of the top science education journals that I'll be talking about later. As Professor Seputro noted, I was the editor of Research in Science Education, which is one of the top 3 or 4 science education journals in the world. I'm currently on the editorial board of the Journal of Research in Science Teaching, JRST, which is arguably the top science education journal in the world. And I've been also reviewing other people's papers for a very long time and do a lot of reviewing of papers that are submitted for publication. So this is just to give you a sense of the experience that I'm bringing to this and where the things that I'm talking about come from. One thing that I did want to say, the first part, I apologize if it repeats things that you're learning in your doctoral program at UNS. One of the points that I want to make is that publishing a good paper doesn't start when you have the manuscript and you're ready to send it to a journal. Publishing a good paper starts when you begin the research project. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the research process and how we make sure that the research is of high quality. Then we write the paper, then we submit the paper. So as I say, this may be something that's familiar with you, but hopefully helpful from that perspective. So in terms of things that I'm going to talk about, how to identify your topic of what you want to research, choosing who you're writing for, who's the audience of this particular work, educational research paradigms, qualitative and quantitative, which I'm sure you do know quite a lot about already, standards for judging the quality of research, research ethics, and then moving to how to choose a journal. Talking a little bit about some of the big journals in our field in science education, ways we know that a journal is of high quality in the field, including rankings and so on. Making sure that the journal is the right journal for this particular paper. So reading the aims and scope of the journal and ensuring that this paper fits with this journal. And preparing a manuscript and responding to peer review. So all of the steps of publishing in a high quality journal. So I hope that those are helpful things. So in deciding what question to research, the question to me is, what do you care about? What is the thing that you want to change? So looking at the video at the start, what you're trying to do is develop a really strong, rich, well-elaborated science education program for Indonesia. So there are obviously a number of things that we need to know in order to do that. So for most of the students in this program, it will be some aspect of how do we improve science education in Indonesia. So deciding what the particular question is the place to start. And also, is it just what I care about as a researcher or a writer? Who do I help by doing this? Do I help school students to study science? Do I help the nation to advance by having more people with a scientific background? Do I just help rich people to have employees that know more, for example? So what are my values? What am I trying to achieve in the research I'm doing? And I think just, we say in education and in universities sometimes, publish or perish. You must publish to keep your job. You must publish to get the grant. You must publish to be promoted and so on. And I think that's true, and I think that's important. But if we're just publishing to meet those targets that are other people's targets, I think we're less passionate about the research. We want to do research that's meaningful to us, that we care about. Research is hard work and it can be disappointing. So making sure that it's a real topic that helps the people we care about helping, I think is important. When we report a research project, we're saying, I didn't know something and now I do, but you're also saying, we as a society, as a science education community, didn't know this particular thing and now we do. Research is extending the boundaries of human knowledge. So we're making a claim that we did this research, we did it carefully, and now we know that something that we didn't know before. So thinking about the words in bold here are the criterion that a reviewer is looking for. A reviewer for a journal is saying, does this work make a significant? In other words, the contribution is not tiny, the contribution is significant. It's original, it hasn't been done before. Contribution to knowledge in the chosen field. So, for example, sometimes people will submit a paper about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education, to a journal that's strictly focused on science education. So it's not quite in the chosen field. It's not a good fit between the journal and the paper. And in that case, the paper is likely to be rejected because it's not in the chosen field, but significant original contribution. And how do we know that our findings are accurate? How do we know that we've done good quality research? What are the standards that we apply? And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail. But in order to achieve the goal, so we do the research, we write the paper, that's not the end of it. The paper isn't the product, because our goal was to help people. Our goal was to improve education. So in order to have that new knowledge used in classrooms, used in schools, used in universities, who do we need to convince that the research was worthwhile and that whatever we're suggesting or promoting is a positive thing to do? So for teachers, if teachers are reading your research, they want to know, is it going to work in my classroom? Are my students going to get higher grades? Are my students going to behave better? Are my students going to enjoy their learning more? So the standards that matter for a teacher might be different to the standards that matter for a government minister, who might want to know something about, is the education system going to achieve more results for less money? I think the education minister might care about. So thinking about who the audience is that you need to convince influences the way that you actually write. We talk about this idea of the research practice gap, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but the idea that we in universities do research and it doesn't really influence what happens in the classroom. So we can think about, is that really the case? Does it happen much? And if so, why? What can we do to make our research more relevant in the classroom? And one of the things that we can do is write a paper for the people in this room, the fellow academics. So we write a paper, we publish it in a top journal, and it's for other researchers in science education. But we also write a paper for teachers. It's written in teachers' language, and it's given what I've discovered in my research, this is what should happen in your classroom to get these particular results. So doing both of those things and sending that to a teacher education journal, and I'll speak about teacher education journals in a little while as well. But I think that's one of the ways to address the research practice gap, is to write for teachers. And the paper for academics might be 6,000 words. The paper for teachers might be 600 words. Teachers are busy, teachers work hard. So having something that's accessible for teachers is a good outcome of research, I think. So when we talk about research, we sometimes default to, particularly because we're science people, we like science, we understand science. So we default to that science model of, we have an experimental group and a control group. We put a condition on the experimental group. We keep everything else in the control group the same. We find out whether the groups are different at the end, right? So that's kind of the very traditional process product or experimental research approach. And that's one way to do research. And it's a good way. If you want to make the claim that a particular treatment, a particular kind of teaching. So I did some work around scientific visualizations, computer-based virtual laboratories. If I want to argue that my virtual laboratory is as good as a real laboratory or better than a real laboratory, if I want to test that claim, I need this kind of experiment. I need to teach some students in the virtual online laboratory, and I need to teach some in the real world laboratory and find out which is more effective and for what kinds of knowledge and so on. But there's also action research, which tends to occur in schools where teachers or communities are trying to change something. So the goal is not so much creating new knowledge, or it's creating new knowledge in order to change something real in the world. So it's a kind of different approach to research. We do tend to write it up, we do tend to publish it, but the main goal is not the publication. The main goal is to make things better in the local context. And then program evaluation. If I've got a new product, a new teaching approach, how do I know that it's good? How do I know that it's effective? Do I need to evaluate it, test it, check it? And another form of research that we don't use very much in science education at all, I've done some of it early in my career, is narrative research. Teachers' stories about what it means to teach, what it's like to teach. These can be really effective for passing on knowledge from one generation of teachers to the new teachers, for example. But we won't talk much about those. The two paradigms, and again, I won't spend a huge amount of time on this. Thomas Kuhn talked about a paradigm, a set of related beliefs, theories, ideas, and assumptions. And essentially in research, in education, we tend to have the quantitative and qualitative paradigms. We can also call quantitative positivist because it assumes that we can say true things about the world, that we can make positive claims about truth and reality. Qualitative research can be described as post-positivist because I think in qualitative research, we're a bit less confident that we can make these true claims that will stand up to challenges and so on. But they have different methods associated. So quantitative paradigm is like that experimental research. We measure the quantities of things, we count things, we get numbers, and then we do some statistics on them, and we make claims about it. So we use cause and effect models. If I change this, it will change this other result. I don't think I need to talk about this very much with this audience because as I say, we are science people. We understand dependent, independent, and controlled variables and so on. What was I going to say? If you're doing research in this field, then you usually need a lot of respondents. You need a lot of responses, surveys, whatever it happens to be, so that you can have statistical power, so that the analyses will be reliable. So if you're wanting to do something just in your own classroom, for example, so you've got 15 students in the experimental and 15 students in the control group, it's usually not enough to do good quality quantitative work because the statistical power of that smaller sample size won't lead to a reliable result. So that's one of the ways that we decide what kind of research we're going to do. Do I want to send a survey to the whole city, the whole province, the whole country, or do I want to do something very detailed in my own classroom? Qualitative is much more like the humanities, the arts, the social sciences. And it's about the qualities of things, the description. So it's more likely to be in words. It's more likely to use interviews, observations, a whole variety of other things. And I'll talk about those standards in a moment. We can mix up a little of each. We don't have to choose either quantitative or qualitative. We can have some of each in a paper, a multi-method or a mixed method approach that uses some quantitative for the big picture and some qualitative for the fine details of the situation. So choosing a project for your doctoral studies or for your next research, we always say that a doctorate is not the end of a research career, it's the beginning of a research career. So you'll look at one project for your doctorate, and then you will look at other projects across the course of your career. They may be related or not. We choose based on what we care about, and particularly for a doctoral project where it will take a number of years, you really want to still be in love with your topic at the end of the project. So you need something that you care about that's important. What are your goals? What are you trying to achieve? I also usually ask doctoral students, is your goal to be an academic? Is it to come to the university and be a professor? Is it to be a leader in your school district? Is it to be a leader in your school? Because not everybody who does a doctoral study wants to become an academic. So understanding why people are doing their doctoral studies helps us advise them well, and helps you as a doctoral student to make good decisions and making a difference, as I mentioned earlier. In education, so for example, if I do some research here in my classroom in Sydney, and my university also has a campus in Fremantle on the other side of the country near Perth, if I do some research in one, does it apply to the other? And does it apply in Indonesia? And does it apply in Germany? And so on. How do I know whether it applies in my context? If I'm reading some research from Indonesia, do I know that it applies? One of the ways to know that is if the paper tells me richly about the context of the research. If the paper says this was a grade 7 class in a rural area, it was a science class generally, but we were studying the physics of forces. We understand something about the students, who they are, where they are, and so on. Because the reader needs to be able to say, these things are similar to my context, where I want to use the written knowledge. These things are different from my context. Will this knowledge apply in my context? I'm not sure. So establishing the context richly in the paper so that the knowledge is transferable. And this is definitely one of the issues with international journals. So quite often I will receive a paper to review and it uses a whole lot of acronyms and a whole lot of terms that are specific to one country. The United States is particularly bad at this. They assume that everybody knows their stuff. So I'm often sending papers back and saying, please tell us more about the context in a way that's accessible to an international audience. Please make it clear for everybody in the world what's going on in this classroom, rather than only for people who have the same knowledge and assumptions that you do. I'm actually just going to skip that slide because I know I've got a lot to talk about and not a huge amount of time. But I think creating a research question or some research questions is important early in the process, but they might change. As you learn more and know more in the course of the project, you may change your research questions. You'll probably need to talk to the research office about that and changing it. But having that conversation about, okay, I've started with these questions, this is what I'm exploring, but being willing to move them if they need to move in the process of the study. So what kind of evidence do you need? You're going to make a knowledge claim, correct? So you're going to say, as a result of having done this research, I know this. In order to be able to make that knowledge claim and to support it with evidence, what evidence do I need? So if I want to claim that my treatment, whatever I'm doing with the students, is going to raise their grades, then I'm going to need some evidence about their grades. If I want to say that it makes students enjoy their learning more, I might need to interview them or survey them to find out something about how much they enjoy their learning, and so on. If I want to, you understand the point that I'm making, that in terms of the claims that I want to make, I can decide what evidence I will need to make those claims and what will be manageable to do. I'm always saying to doctoral students, either, sorry, your project is currently too small, you need to make it bigger. It's not the size of a doctoral project yet, it's a master's project. Or much more commonly, your project is far too big. You're very ambitious, you want to research the entire world, you only have a limited amount of time and resources during your doctorate. Make your project smaller, make your project manageable for yourself. And that's one of the things that your supervisory team works on, is helping you to decide the right size of project for the doctoral studies. Because as I said, you have more time later in your research career to come to all those other interesting questions that you don't have time for now. But getting a project that's the right size. Methods are dictated really by the paradigm. So the paradigm that you've chosen will suggest the kinds of surveys that you will do. Again, I won't spend a lot of time belaboring this because I'm sure your professors are already talking about this. What kinds of evidence, what kind of methods do we use in the particular approaches? And typically with a qualitative project, you'll go start, step, 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 finish. Not always, many times. With a qualitative project, much more often you'll go start, step, step, go back a step, go forward a step, go another step, go back a step. There'll be more iterative back and forth approaches. Types of data for quantitative, fairly easy. We're generating numbers, so some surveys or some test scores or other kinds of things that generate numbers, some counts of students, etc. For qualitative, there's lots of things. So stories from teachers, from students, from the researcher, interviews, focus groups, often with students, school students. I will get 5 or 6 students together and talk to them that way because they'll be less comfortable if you're one-on-one with them. Surveys, videos, audio. I've done lots of audio research. There are lots of different methods that we can use. See, at least one question popped up in the chat as well. So I'll take those at the end, but yeah, looking forward to those. I'm going to skip that as well. That's more detail than we need. The standards, I think, are important because what you want in your paper that you're preparing for publication is to be judged by the appropriate standards. If someone uses the standards that apply to quantitative work on qualitative work, they won't make a good judgment of it. And those of you who are publishing probably have had this experience where the reviewer didn't quite understand what kind of work it was and didn't apply the correct standards. So the standards have changed over time. And there are really kind of a set of quantitative standards and a set of qualitative standards that we use now. So that means because you can't just assume that everybody's using the same standards, you need to say in the paper, these are the standards I'm using to judge the quality of my own work. This is how I know that the work I've done is good quality work. So for quantitative, they're the standards of science. So validity. Does the study measure what it claims to measure? Construct validity, face validity, content validity, and criterion validity. So in other words, if you've said that you're measuring thing X, are you actually measuring thing Y? You need to be sure that the study is valid and that it's reliable. If I use the same test to test the same thing, I'll get the same result. It's not random. It's not a factor of the weather today or some other random factor. So is your method reliable? For qualitative, it's a little bit more complicated. Guba and Lincoln came out with these criteria, the trustworthiness criteria. Credibility, is it believable? Particularly research that's intended for teachers, is it believable by teachers? Do teachers say, this sounds like a real classroom? Or do they say, no, this doesn't ring true, it doesn't feel right? Is it transferable? Can I use it in a different country, different context, different place? Is it dependable? Can I be confident that when I use it, it will work and appear and so on in different contexts? And is it confirmable? If somebody else does research on the same topic, will they find similar results? In other words, is there a way to, the quantitative term would be replicate, to have someone replicate your experiment. And in chemistry, and I know Chemistry Education Association is present, we want to be able to replicate. If I can do a particular synthesis or a particular mechanism in organic chemistry, you want somebody else to be able to replicate the same experiment. In qualitative research, confirmability has that same sort of role. So there's a lot more that could be said about these criteria, but I think they are helpful in thinking about what does quality look like in qualitative research. And then the authenticity criteria. Is it fair? Is what I'm asking of the participants fair in terms of the benefits for the participants? Is it authentic in terms of its ability, catalytic authenticity, its ability to create change, and so on? I won't go into this in great detail, but reading up on Guber and Lincoln's work, Egon Guber and Yvonne Lincoln, it's well worth looking at. It is quite old now. It's from the late 1980s, I think, but it's still very powerful. So, all right, this is, I think, what we're here for, choosing a journal. So what you want is the best possible journal for this particular work. You want the highest ranked possible journal, but not every not every paper is for every journal, and not every paper is for a very high ranked journal. So let's talk about how we choose the journal that we want to send something to. Making sure that the fit is correct, making sure that this paper is the right paper for this journal is crucial. I think that the question in the chat was about what's the most common reason that papers are rejected? And that's certainly one of them. If you send it to the wrong journal and it doesn't fit, if it's a maths paper going to a physics journal, things like that, then it will almost certainly be rejected. So making sure that it fits, and we'll talk about how to do that. And as I say, you want the highest ranked journal you can get. So you might start at a high ranked journal and then try to go through the review process, get feedback, improve the paper. If it ends up being rejected from the highly ranked journal, you might come down to a slightly lower ranked journal. Starting ambitiously, realizing though that this can also take time, that the high ranked journals are very busy, the reviewers are very busy, so it often takes some time to get reviews back. So this process can take some time. So if you need a quick publication, I believe Professor Seputro said you need a publication as part of your doctoral studies. So that publication you might put in a journal where you think it will be published more quickly, because you would like to have that happen in the course of your studies. One of the things that journals really hate is if you've submitted your work to multiple journals at the same time. Most of them ask you to say somewhere in the website, I haven't submitted this anywhere else. It might seem like it would be a great idea. I'll just send it out to 7 journals and find out which one accepts it most quickly. But it's not really acceptable, because what happens if all of those journals put in all of the effort to review the paper and then one of them gets it and the others don't? It's not really fair. So sending it out to one journal and then to the next journal, not to multiple journals at the same time. When you're sending a paper to a journal, do a new literature review of just that journal. So if you're submitting something to Research in Science Education, find out what Research in Science Education says about that particular topic and cite it in the paper, because the reviewers will be looking for citations from the same journal that you're submitting the work to. So it's a good tip, I think, and it's a relatively easy way to make it clear that, hey, I know what this journal is, what it's about, and in terms of my specific topic of my research, I understand what the discussion is in this community, what's gone before in terms of publications in this journal. Make sure the paper is well formatted in accordance with the formatting guidelines. The instructions for authors can be quite long and quite complicated, but make sure that if it's APA referencing, you use that. If it's MLA or Chicago or all of the other referencing conventions, you use the correct one. And some particular houses have I think Springer has its own special style that's not any of the public ones like APA. So using the right referencing, making sure that the spell checking, the style, the formatting, etc., the fonts are consistent, all of that kind of style things. Just making sure that it's fair. The correctness of the academic English language probably shouldn't count so much. It should really be about the scientific merit of the work done. But to some extent it does, particularly if the reviewer struggles to understand the quality of the work done because of the language. So getting some help and support with the language. To my shame, I only speak one language. I speak English and only, and I'm sure many of you speak at least 2 and probably more languages than that. So I'm aware of this as an issue, but finding some support with that, finding a way to get support to make sure that the language is not only correct English, but correct academic English, because there is a bit of a difference. And often if you use a general English editing service, it won't be writing in academic English. So getting help with academic English is kind of important, I think. This talk is all about reputable journals, but when we talk about reputable journals, it implies that there must be just disreputable journals. There must be journals that we don't want to publish in. So there are quite a lot. I don't know about you, but I receive probably 10 emails a week from new journals that want me to publish in them. And often they are badly spelled. Often they come from a Gmail address or a Hotmail address or something like that, rather than from a formal journal website. And always they want me to pay a lot of money to publish in their journal. And most often they promise very quick turnaround, very fast peer review, 10-day peer review, and so on. Now, there are some good quality online journals that do have fast turnaround and that do charge for publication. I've worked with some of those. So it's not as simple as if it's an online open access journal, it's bad. There are some good ones and some bad ones, but the bad ones will take your money. They will publish the work that's not really ready to be published, and it won't really serve your reputation. It won't do good things for your career, and it will cost you a lot of money. So I think avoiding predatory journals. There is a list at this URL. It's just called Beale's List of Predatory Journals or Predatory Publishers. If you'll have the PowerPoint, so you can, I think, control click on the link and you'll be able to go to that list. And it just, if you're thinking of publishing in a journal, if someone approaches you, please publish in our journal, you can check on this list and see whether it's good or not, because this is a list of bad journals. It's not complete because more bad journals pop up all the time, but it's a good place to start in thinking about choosing a really good quality journal. So here are a few of the journals that I think are of good quality in science education. JRST, I think, is a really strong one. Science education, studies in science education is very highly ranked as well. And proudly, I can say our Australasian journal, which is Research in Science Education, is one of the top 4. So if you can publish in any one of these, that's a real achievement. That's an achievement that, so, you know, in science, if you're a chemist or a physicist and you publish in the journal Science or the journal Nature, quite often in many universities, you'll get a large cash bonus, and you'll definitely get a party thrown for you if you publish in one of those journals. It's a big deal if you publish in Science or Nature. It's not quite as big to publish in these, but it's pretty big. If you publish in these journals, it's a big deal. It can really boost your career. It's well worth trying to do. Couple of others, International Journal of Science Education is also a good one, good quality journal. And then I've kind of talked about a couple of others that are slightly lower ranked, not a lot lower. I think Science and Education is still a quartile 1 journal. research in science and technological education, slightly different focus. So if you're doing science education, but doing it with technology, like my virtual laboratory work, that might be the kind of journal that you would send that work to. Teaching Science is the journal in which I published that very first paper, the one that I showed you right at the start from 1995. It's a journal for teachers. So if you're writing something for teachers, the journal Teaching Science is a good one. And it is a little bit easier to publish in than some of these really highly ranked journals. So it's well worth considering. I think there are quite a lot of others as well. I've kind of focused on the ones that I'm aware of, the ones that I've published in, the ones that I've worked with. Some of those are in North America. Some of them are in Australia or Australasian region. Some of them are based in Europe as well. Let me talk a little bit about the quartile rankings. So I mentioned that some journals are Q1, quartile 1, quartile 2, quartile 3, etc. If you go to that link, samagojournalrankings.com, and then search any journal, if it's on the list, you will find out its ranking. And I'll show you a couple of examples of that in a moment. So again, it's a way of testing whether the journal is good. If it's not on the list at all, you might want to consider not publishing in it. And if it's ranked very low, if it's Q4, if it is if it's in the quartile 76 to 100%, that means it's in the lowest 25%. It's the least reputable 25% of journals. If it's Q4, Q1 is the top 25%. So those are the best journals to publish in. As I say, you want to try and publish in the highest ranked journal that you can get that work into. But having said that, the Q1 journals, the rejection rate of manuscripts, so of all the manuscripts that are submitted, about 95% are rejected, about 5% are published. So one manuscript in 20 that is submitted ends up being published. Now that's quite daunting, but it just means we work harder. It just means we make our work better. So because this is kind of the point, publishing in these journals is a mark of the fact that you're doing really high quality, excellent work. So it's difficult. Like anything that's worth doing and anything that's good, it's challenging, but worthwhile. So here is what that Samago journal ranking looks like for the journal Research in Science Education. And you can see across the screen from left to right, you've got the years of operation of the journal. And the color of the bar is the quartile that it's in. So the green color is Q1. So you can see that this journal has been in quartile 1 since 2009 continuously. Before that, it was the yellow color, which is quartile 2. So this journal has been getting better and better over time. It used to be lower ranked. It's one of the top ranked journals in the world now. And as we said at the start, I was the editor of it for 2016 to 2018. So I'll take some credit for some of that, for at least not making it worse while I was looking after it. This is a different journal, Science and Education, which I think I mentioned before as well. You can see that although it is also Q1, it's also green since 2018. It has been Q2 in the past, and 2006, 2007, it was Q3. So it was a lower ranked journal and has risen. I won't go into H-index, but if anyone wants to ask about H-index later, we can talk about that. But so these are some measures of the quality of journals. Their publishers, there's more information at the ranking page as well. I've just kind of grabbed the headlines, but getting that kind of sense of, for this journal, what's the history? Has it been good? Is it continuing to be good? Is it getting better? And so on. So the aims and scope is on the journal's website and tells you what this journal accepts, and it's how you know whether the journal is right for the paper. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to stop sharing this and share a browser for a minute, because we'll just go to the website and look at the, sorry, this is the Samago journal ranking system first. So let me see, what journal didn't I talk about? What about science and education, which was, so not science education, but science and education, which is a slightly different one. It's focused on the history and philosophy of science more than in terms of education. So if we have a look at the ranking for that one, it's just thinking. There it is. I have to scroll down and find it. Science and education. I'll maximize that as well. So you can see it also has an H index, and it also has, if we scroll down far enough, one of those sets of bars. Actually, I have a feeling that was the one I showed you before, isn't it? It's the same one. Sorry, maybe we need to find a different journal. Anyway, you get the point. You can look at that. So JSET, Journal of Science, Education and Technology, is another one that I've published in and reviewed for. Let's have a quick look at that, just so we sort of see what it's like. You can see the H index is bigger, and even without explaining what it is, bigger is better on that particular number. So if we scroll down, actually, you'll see that this one is doubly coded. It's coded in both engineering and education. So in education, it has been Q2, it has been Q3, but it's now Q1 and has been for about 13 years. So it's a good journal in education, and it's also a good journal in engineering, if anyone's writing work in engineering. So some of those, understanding what the journal's role is and what it's involved with. Okay, so the aims and scope, sorry, I'll return to that. So for research in science education, here's the aims and scope. You can also see some various metrics about the journal. Impact factor, which is a measure of the papers published in this journal, how many are cited by other researchers? In other words, are the researchers finding this work useful enough that they will cite it in their papers? So this is a very, very high impact factor for a journal in education. They're usually much lower. So this is a very good journal. It's ranked at number 107 out of 1,300. So it's in the top 8%, if my mental maths is right, something like that. So it's right up the top in terms of the journals. So publishes scholarly work that promotes science education research in all contexts and at all levels of education. So if you're doing something about university science education, or if you're doing something about kindergarten, preschool science education, it can still fit into RISE. That might not be true for other journals. So I think I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but it's specific about what it will and won't include. So RISE will consider scholarly works that explore areas such as STEM, health, environment, cognitive science, neuroscience, psychology, and higher education, where science education is forefronted. So that doesn't mean you can just publish any old psychology paper in this journal. It can be a psychology study where it's about science education. So there is quite a lot of detail there. And RISE seeks to publish empirical research papers, not so much opinion pieces or reviews of research. It's wanting to publish actual research studies that have been conducted and be reporting those. It didn't used to have a word count, but now it does, 6,000 words maximum. And there are some instructions about a number of things I've talked about already. So state the significance or innovative contribution, right? I had the bit in bold text earlier in the slideshow. It's saying significant original contribution to knowledge. So they're saying the same thing. And not only have it be a significant original contribution to knowledge, but tell us that it is and what it is. What is your original contribution to knowledge? State it very explicitly in the paper. And make your work internationalized in the sense that your work has relevance beyond your context to a broader audience. And engage substantively with prior research published in RISE. So in other words, as I said, if RISE has published if the journal you're publishing in has published work on the topic, you should know about it and you should cite it. So it's nice to see that this journal is repeating some of the things that I'm saying, or possibly I'm repeating what they're saying. Just to give you one other example, the International Journal of Science Education is another similar journal. We mentioned it. It has a part A and a part B, which we won't go into for the moment. But for the aims and scope, it talks about this as well. It talks about integration of science education with other disciplines and lists some of those. It talks about applicable research relevant to educational practice. So they're interested in what changes what happens in education. They do special issues, so you could propose a special issue potentially and on a topic. Submissions that are concerned with science, as distinct from science education or general education, will not be considered for publication. So they don't do science papers. If you have a chemistry paper about synthesizing a new drug, don't send it here. That's not the right journal. Send it to a chemistry journal. If you have an education paper that's about some other part of education aside from science, history education, don't send that here either. So they want science education specifically, and they're saying so, and so on. So again, I won't go through it in great detail, but reading through the aims and scope, being really clear that this paper is right for this journal and vice versa. So let me stop sharing that one and go back to the slides. I won't be talking for too much longer. I know it's been quite a while. There we go.
Okay.
So those are the two that we just shared. A couple more just tips from my own reviewing for how to get a paper well regarded by reviewers and therefore accepted. I've said an academic paper is not a mystery novel. Sometimes the author doesn't want to tell us the ending until the end. No, please tell us right at the very beginning what you're doing. And sometimes I reviewed a paper yesterday where the authors started off saying, learning physics is difficult and students have trouble learning physics concepts, and gave me a big story about how difficult physics is. And then 4 paragraphs down started to tell me what their research was about, right? Don't do that. Tell me in sentence 1, what's this research about? Use a topic sentence or a thesis sentence. So the very first sentence of so if you start a novel, if you start a Dickens novel, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. There's a line at the start that just captures your attention and tells you what you're in for. The paper should do the same thing. So tell us what the knowledge claim is and the standards you've applied. So I believe that virtual online laboratories are just as good as real world laboratories for teaching stoichiometry in chemistry. This quantitative study with an experimental and a control group has demonstrated this with this result, right? So very explicitly, this is what I'm claiming to know, and this is how I know. These are the standards that I do it. So start out with that, because what you're doing is actually setting up the reviewer's mind for everything else in the paper. That topic sentence tells the reviewer what to expect, and then every other word in the paper has to earn its place. Don't waste any words, because you have to talk about your research methods. You have to do a literature review, tell us what we already know about the literature. You have to talk about your participants, share your results, share your conclusions. So every word has to earn its place, but every word is supporting your knowledge claim. So if you've stated your knowledge claim clearly up front, then the reviewer is looking for that evidence to support the knowledge claim as they go through. And you've set their mind up correctly so that they're looking for the right thing. Because sometimes I'll be reviewing a paper, get halfway through and say, oh, hang on, is that what they're doing? I thought they were doing this other thing because they didn't tell me what they were doing. So making sure that you've clearly stated what the goal is. Making sure that you include research ethics information in your paper. I know some journals don't seem to require it to be included in the paper, but I would always want it to be included. And I very often send back papers when I'm reviewing to say, please add the research ethics information. Tell us what research ethics board or institutional review board approved the study, and tell us what you did. How did you choose your participants? Did you just grab all the students in your class, or did you select your friends? How did you choose the participants to make sure that they represent the population you're talking about. What did you tell the participants? Did you tell them the truth, the whole truth? Make sure that the participants are fully informed. They gave free and informed consent, and there was no conflict of interest. You didn't say, please participate in my research and I'll give you a higher grade, because that wouldn't be fair. That would be a conflict of interest, because it would mean that the students their grade was almost hostage to participating in your research. So they gave free and fair and informed consent, and that they were allowed to withdraw at any time without penalty. So if they got halfway through the study and said, this is making me uncomfortable, I don't want to continue, they were allowed to withdraw from that. These are kind of basics of ethics. Your ethics clearance will have required you to do these things, but make sure you include it in the paper and make sure you do it. That's the other thing. Occasionally, I'll review a paper, ask for the ethics clearance, and discover that there was no ethics clearance gained. If there's no ethics clearance gained from a research ethics board, we can't publish the work in the journal. So ensure that when you're doing research, the ethics are done right at the very beginning, so that you make sure that before you collect any data at all, you have the research ethics clearance in place. And tell us about it in the paper. Final topic and final point. Almost nobody gets their paper accepted instantly. I've published, as I said at the start, 120 or so papers. I don't think I've ever had one, maybe one, where the reviewers came back and said, yep, paper is perfect already, we'll publish it straight away, right? That doesn't happen. There'll always be something. So don't be despondent if the reviews come back and ask you to make some changes, because they always do. They might be minor changes, they might be major changes. So there will always be that process, and there might be multiple processes. Usually it's 1, 2, maybe 3 times. I have had papers that went to the reviewers and back to the author 7 times, but were published in the end. So it can happen. You kind of hope it won't happen to you as an author, because it's a lot of work, but it can happen. So persisting, not giving up, not deciding it's not worth it, but continuing. If you get a comment and the reviewer has really not understood what you're about, or it's something that's their little obsession that that's not really right for your paper, you can write in your response to reviewers, we hear what the reviewer has said, but we don't agree, and so we won't be making a change in relation to that recommendation. Right? You can push back on a recommendation the reviewer says. You can't push back on everything, but some things. If it's really genuinely, pardon me, if it's really genuinely an unfair criticism of the paper, you can say, no, we don't believe that this is a fair criticism, and explain why that's the case, and therefore not respond to that point. So create a table and say, reviewer 1 said this is the change we've made in the paper, or this is why we haven't made a change in the paper, or we already dealt with that on page 7, reviewer 1 just missed it, whatever it happens to be. So a very clear table just says, this is what the reviewers said, these are our responses as an author or an author team. So make that very clear. Mark up a version of the manuscript with tracked changes, so that the reviewers can see, okay, here are where the changes are, here's what's happened. I can see that these authors have taken my suggestions seriously and have incorporated them seriously in the paper. Because if you just send back a version with the changes, but they're not tracked changes, it's very hard to remember from 2 months ago when you saw the paper before, what the paper was like before and what's changed. So that tracked changes version is very helpful to the reviewer to know what's changed. Track changes can give you away though, because if you've just added a word here and there, or a paragraph, a sentence, but you haven't really substantially changed anything, but the paper needed big changes, then the reviewers will say, no, this author hasn't been serious. They haven't really put the work in to rethink the paper. They've just messed around at the edges, if you like. So making sure that you make real changes, and you might have to move whole sections up and down, add whole sections, rewrite the paper from scratch, even if the problems with the paper are serious enough. So putting in the time to really take the reviews seriously gives you a much, much higher chance of success when you resubmit the paper. Or if you submit it to another journal. The work put into a paper is never wasted because it will always be published and accepted somewhere if you persist and if you keep working and improving it. But as I also said right at the start, if the study is fundamentally flawed, if you do bad research, then no amount of writing can save that. You need to do a good study and then write about it well. So make sure that the study is well planned, well designed, get lots of support from colleagues and supervisors. Because as I say, a paper can be improved and improved until it's publishable. But if the study was bad, you're going to have to go back and do a different study. And that's obviously a huge commitment of time and energy and so on. And if you do have a paper that's rejected by one journal and you want to submit it to a different journal, don't just send it off immediately. Do all of the same checks to make sure that you fit it to the new journal. So if it has a different referencing convention, change the references. If it do that literature review, find out what's published in this new journal that you're sending it to about the topic and cite that. So, there's a little bit of work to do rather than just, it didn't get into journal A, I will just send it off in the same form to journal B. Because the reviewers at journal B might be a little bit insulted if you look as though you haven't bothered to follow the instructions for how to publish in that journal. So making sure that you put in the work if you're changing the journal that you're working with. And that's it. I'm sorry that was a lot quickly, but I know there are a lot of questions in the chat already. I might take the PowerPoint down. I think Dr. Mohammed has raised his hand, so we might take a verbal question while I'm looking at the written questions. Thank you, sir.
Silakan Dr. Muhammad Haris Bandi.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Sulistyo. Hi, David. Do you still recognize me? I'm Harry. Yeah.
Hi, how's it going?
Yeah. How about you, Geelan? Long time no see you. When I was taking my PhD during 2009 and 2013, we were there in UQ. Yeah, I'm very happy to see you again today. And you are now a professor, right? Okay, congratulations for you, Geelan. Okay. Professor Geelan, I want to ask you several questions. First of all, is you are talking about the spectrum of research, start from the traditional experiment to the qualitative research, including the action research and the
narrative, I think.
Narrative research, yeah. But you are not talking about the research and development study. Because many study around the world also produce some learning materials and they implement the learning materials to see the effect of the new materials to the students' learning outcomes, the R&D, or maybe you can a bit talk about that. Because when I know you, you are also the expert of the technology, education technology, right, in UQ. Okay, and then the second one is, how about the some new journals, Geelan, issued by Elsevier with what is it, the by APC, yeah? We have to pay for the submission. You said that that kind of journal is not reputable and we should avoid them, but lately, many of those kind of journal issued by Elsevier, Taylor and Francis, but most people go to them to submit their manuscripts. And the third one is how significant is the significance, Geelan? Because this is the very big question for particularly for PhD student. Many of my students, also Professor Sulistyo student in the doctorate program. Oh yeah, I forget to tell you that I am the secretary program of doctorate program in the University of Jambi in Sumatra. We also conduct science education in the doctorate program, and I am the secretary. In around in students' opinion that the significant must be like a Nobel, something very significant. But I think that's not true. Maybe you could explain to all the students in this room that a PhD is not a Nobel, but it must significant enough. Is that right, Geelan? So
yeah, no, I
they
think
don't
so.
have, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So
so that-
PhD is not a Nobel, but it must produce a significant enough contribution to the body of knowledge. I think that's all for me, Geelan. Thank you again to see you again. Yeah.
Yeah, no, excellent
Thank
to see you. It's been many years and many places for both of us, I'm sure. So, yeah. So let me take the reverse order quickly on those. The significance and the scale of the question, yes, agreed that in the sciences, we know that you make a tiny little extra contribution to knowledge. So a new paper, makes one new bond in a molecule or something like that. It's very tiny, but it's still a significant contribution to knowledge. So yeah, the scope of what you can do in a doctoral study will be smaller than what you can do later in your career with more resources and a large grant and a team and so on. So the appropriate size, I think, is exactly right. On APCs, publishing charges, yes, I was quite brief on that, and I probably shouldn't have been. There are reputable journals that publish open access. I think Science Education, I think JRST even does now, Springer, Taylor and Francis, reputable publishers. It's very expensive. It's 3,000 Australian dollars or more sometimes. It's very expensive. If you've got the resources, if you've got a grant or something like that, or actually sometimes for developing countries, there are discounts or even free possible open access publication. So that's worth thinking about as well. If you've got the resources, open access papers do get cited more because more people can see it. People who don't have a subscription to the journal can see it. So there are benefits to a high quality open access publication, but it's wildly expensive. And I don't necessarily want to spend the money. But as I say, if somebody else, if the government will pay it or my university will pay it, then I might publish open access. And then, yeah, the development and testing of materials, I guess, is what I was talking about as program evaluation. And Guba and Lincoln, who talked about the authenticity criteria and trustworthiness criteria, also did a book on program evaluation that's very good. So yeah, if we develop a material, we want to be able to test how effective it is. We want to be able to make claims about how effective it is. That's also a piece of research. So developmental, the research and the development is, are we making a contribution to knowledge, or are we doing some business? Are we claiming that our product is amazing, so you should buy it from us, right? So there's both concerns. You might be doing something in order to prop up a product. Okay, let me have 1 second to read that there are many questions. Let me quickly scan through.
Okay, thank you, Geelan.
No worries, thank you. So I think I've answered the one about what criteria papers are most often rejected on. So match with the journal and so on. Sorry, am I getting a signal from Mr. Dwiki that we should wrap up? How are we doing for time?
Yeah. I will give a question from the chat room from Dr. Yuli Rahmawati. One, based on your experience as editor, what is the most principal criteria that journal will be rejected? And what is the most contrasting topic in reputable journal in science education?
Yeah, really interesting. So I think I've answered the first part, which was about why things are rejected. They are rejected usually if they're missing some of those elements, the topic sentence, the research ethics, and so on. They're rejected if they're just poorly developed and presented. They're rejected if there is a fundamental problem with the research design, that it doesn't support the claim that it makes. They're rejected if the match with the journal is not correct. If the paper has gone to the journal, it's not a good fit for it. The interesting topics at the moment, I think there is currently a fair bit around the COVID pandemic. People are saying we were all forced to suddenly teach and learn online. How did we do that? Did we do that well? And so on. I think that's an interesting topic. I don't know whether I would be publishing much on that though, because we hope that the pandemic goes away and in 5 years, that paper might be less useful. It might not be cited because it was about this specific time. So if it's a broader paper about how do we do good quality science learning online, that's a bit more timeless than how did we do it during COVID. So I'm just trying to think of other kind of key topics. There's a lot around in chemistry education, representation and the levels of representation, molecular and so on. It's an old topic, but it's still being continued. Yeah, I don't know. There's probably, I think reading lots of journals is the best prescription for finding out the key topics that are current in journals.
Seperti itu Ibu Yuli. The question from Marni Sharifina. How about using the journal instead of reviewing literature like narrative or systematic literature in science education? Professor Geelan.
Okay, yeah. So I'm not perfectly sure about whether. So I mentioned the idea of reviewing the literature from the particular journal that you're publishing in, but for the paper you need to review the literature more broadly. So figure out what is known in the science education community generally about the topic. But certainly you can publish a systematic literature review as a paper. If I was going to do that, I wouldn't send it to RISE, Research in Science Education, because they specifically said we want empirical papers, we want experiments. But there are other journals that say we will publish systematic literature reviews. I think Science Education might be one, but check the aims and scope. And those are a real contribution to knowledge because and it has to be a systematic literature review and it has to add something. It has to synthesize the literature in a way that makes new meaning. It can't just be a list. There are 70 papers about this and here's what they say. It has to synthesize and bring together concepts in some way, but that's a really good way. And I wrote a paper during my doctoral studies, which was kind of that. It wasn't empirical. It wasn't my experiments, which I wrote up later in the thesis and wrote up later. It was constructivist learning in science education. Here is my synthesis. Here's a new way of thinking about there was a diagram and a whole bunch of things. That's my most cited paper still. So it was written during my doctoral studies. It wasn't the big paper out of the doctoral studies, but it's the most cited thing that I've ever written because it just turned out to be useful to people as a literature review. So thank you, Mani.
Thank you, Prof. Once more, Professor Geelan. Do you have some tips for us who went to publish in the reputable journal for the first time? What are the crucial aspects that we should pay attention to? From Arvita Eka Rosawati. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, I think the things that I've talked about in terms of quality and so on are relevant to that question. But I think the other thing is, as a beginning academic, support partnerships, connections. So publish with your supervisors or find another professor or very experienced person because they will have lots of publishing experience to bring to help you shape it and so on. So I think students sometimes think that they have to publish all by themselves, and that's difficult when you're just getting started. So getting those partnerships, getting connections with many of the excellent people in the room who have lots of expertise to share, I think is the biggest tip.
Oh, yes. Okay. Thank you. Any question for the participant? Can raise your hand in the forum or via room chat.
Pak Moderator boleh bertanya lagi ya? Satu lagi aja.
Boleh,
Penting,
boleh,
ya?
boleh.
Oke, Geelan, it's me again. You are
Okay,
talking
hey.
about, yeah, you are talking about action research. You know that you said that action research is not suitable for international publication, but actually in Indonesia, all the teachers are insisted by our government to make classroom action research for them to have their rank increase. So on the other hand, they have also to change the process of learning in their classrooms. So if you said that action research is not suitable for international publication, so how can the result of an action research study can be published in a journal? Thank you, Dylan.
Yeah, thank you. Good question. Yes, let me make the answer slightly more precise. So I wouldn't send an action research paper to International Journal of Science Education, but I might send it to Teaching Science. I think an action research study is really relevant for teachers. So journals that are written for practitioners, journals that are written for classroom teachers, then papers written by classroom teachers can be really appropriate and helpful. So there are international journals that are appropriate for that. They might not be the quartile one, the top 25% journals, but they are still very good quality journals. And you can send that work, and if it's well written up, it is publishable in international journals.
Okay, and how do you think that an action research is focused on the changes of process or the learning outcomes? What do you think, Dylan? Because it's a big discussion amongst educators that an action research must be focused on the change of process to make the learning process better. On the other hand, another parts of expert also said that any research must be helpful or useful for the increase of learning outcomes of the students. What do you think? This is my last question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, so I mean, if you go back to the history of action research, I have a whole other lecture about action research, so we could spend much time on that. But if you go back to the history, it started in sociology, it started in Chicago, and it was very explicitly about how do we make this social situation better. I think it was around racism in Chicago, and how do we make this community more friendly for everybody. So the writing up was almost kind of incidental on the edge. It was about making things better. I think it's changed and evolved over time. So action research is more often now published, a report of what was done. But I think the key to publishing it is that slide I had about context. If I tell you that in my classroom I did this, and it had this result for my students, that's great. But how do you know whether it's relevant for your students in your context? So if you're writing up your action research, don't just write a report of what you did and what the results were, but tell us richly about the context. What was going on around it? How do we apply that to our own context?
Okay, thank you, Geelan.
One smaller question, Prof. Geelan, from Nur Aziza, Putri Hasibuan. The waiver for IPC for development country, is it really can use? What is the name of journal in science education file?
I don't know off the top of my head, but let me do a little bit of research and send something later to Dr. Yuli, who can share it with everybody. There definitely are journals that, as I say, either will give a discount or will give free, or there are agreements between universities and governments and journal publishers.
All right. Thank you, Prof. Any question, ladies and gentlemen?
Narrative inquiry. Yes, I would love to talk about that because it was my own doctorate. So Clandinin and Connolly, Jean Clandinin and Michael Connolly in Canada, are probably the main writers in that particular field. I was a colleague of Jean Clandinin when I was at the University of Alberta in Canada. And they talk about teacher stories and the stories that teachers tell in the school. They talk about the official story of the school. So the vision and values, or the whatever the school tells the world about itself. And then the secret stories of what happens with the teacher in the classroom. So it's a method of trying to understand richly, from a qualitative perspective, what's going on in an educational situation. So my doctorate, I went to a school, I had a scholarship for my doctorate, so I spent 3 days a week for most of a year in classrooms in a school, being a teacher. So I was helping the teachers to teach science, and we were working together collaboratively. And then I told stories about their experience as teachers who didn't have a strong science background, teaching science for the first time, and tried to explain richly what was going on, because I think that topic could be a deficit. These were bad science teachers, and that wasn't the truth at all. They were great science teachers, but they were doing it for the first time without a lot of background and experience. So how do I tell that story richly with narrative? So it's a really good methodology, but I did get a review come back from some of that work that said, these are just coffee house stories. This is nothing. This is not research. So if you do narrative research, you have to send it to the right journal that will accept and receive narrative research.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor David, who has given us knowledge. It will be useful for our daily professor. Last agenda is take a photo together. Please on camera, all participants. Okay. Okay. Slide pertama, 1, 2, 3. Slide kedua, oke. Oke. 1, 2, 3. Okay, finish. Ladies and gentlemen, those are the agenda we have today. We finish our learning session. Thank you, our participants. I wish you all a wonderful day. Finally, from the deepest of my heart, I do apologize for my mistake in presenting this event. Thank you very much for your attention, and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Prof. David. See you
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. David.
Good to talk to you all. I'm just going to answer a question in the chat, so if we don't shut up for 1 second. Yeah. Oh, no, I'll send it to you as well, Yuli. I'll send the answer to the question about standards for judging narrative. So, yeah. Thank you, colleagues.
Okay.
Terima kasih Bapak Ibu atas kehadirannya dan partisipasinya. Monggo apabila ada kegiatan bisa dilanjutkan. Selamat dan sukses selalu Bapak Ibu. Mohon maaf apabila terdapat kekurangannya. Mohon maaf Ibu Yuli.
Terima kasih Mas Diki, Bu Yuli, Bapak Ibu sekalian.
Yes,